Marcus Reed wasn't just another name in the world of entrepreneurship. He was a living testament to what hard work, resilience, and vision could achieve. Born and raised in a small, struggling neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago, Marcus grew up watching his single mother juggle multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. From an early age, he understood that life wouldn't hand him anything. He'd have to build it himself. That lesson became the foundation for everything he did. As a child, Marcus showed an unusual curiosity for technology. While other kids played outside, he spent hours tinkering with old computers his mom brought home from yard sales. He taught himself how to fix them, upgrade their parts, and eventually code simple programs. By the time he reached high school, Marcus had already built his first app, a budgeting tool designed to help families like his manage finances better. Though no one in his family had ever attended college, Marcus earned scholarships and worked part-time jobs to pay his way through university. After graduation, Marcus didn't wait for opportunities to come knocking. He created them. Starting out of his tiny apartment, he launched a tech startup focused on developing affordable software solutions for small businesses. At first, it was tough. Banks refused to give him loans because of his lack of collateral, and investors dismissed him as too risky. But Marcus refused to let rejection stop him. He poured every penny he had into his dream, working late nights and surviving on instant noodles. Slowly but surely, his company began to gain traction. Within 5 years, Marcus's business transformed into a multi-million-dollar enterprise, earning recognition not only for its innovative products, but also for its commitment to hiring and mentoring underrepresented talent. His story inspired countless people, especially young Black entrepreneurs who saw in him a reflection of their own potential. Media outlets started taking notice, profiling him as a rising star in the tech industry. It wasn't long before invitations to speak at conferences and events rolled in. One such invitation came from Morning Talk Live, one of the most popular morning shows in America. Hosted by Victoria Langston, the show was known for its mix of celebrity interviews, trending topics, and lively debates. For Marcus, appearing on the show felt like the perfect opportunity to share his journey and inspire others. Little did he know, this decision would set off a chain reaction that would leave the entire nation talking. Victoria Langston, the face of Morning Talk Live, had made a name for herself as a bold, fearless interviewer, unafraid to ask tough questions. But behind her polished smile lay a reputation that preceded her. She often walked a fine line between being direct and being dismissive, particularly when it came to guests from minority communities. Stories circulated about past interviews where she subtly undermined or outright attacked her guests, leaving them scrambling to defend themselves. Some praised her for holding people accountable, while others criticized her methods as unfair and prejudiced. Despite these whispers, Marcus accepted the invitation with optimism. He believed in the power of storytelling and hoped to use the platform to highlight the importance of diversity in entrepreneurship. As he prepared for the interview, rehearsing answers to potential questions, he reminded himself to stay composed. After all, he'd faced far greater challenges than a TV host's pointed remarks. What he didn't anticipate, however, was the storm brewing beneath the surface, a confrontation that would test his patience, ignite public outrage, and ultimately redefine his legacy. The day of the interview arrived, and Marcus Reed walked into the bustling studio of Morning Talk Live with a calm confidence that caught the attention of everyone around him. Dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, he carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that commanded respect. Backstage, producers buzzed about how well-spoken and composed he seemed during sound checks. Even Victoria Langston briefly exchanged pleasantries with him before taking her seat on set, complimenting his professionalism. When the cameras rolled and the bright studio lights flickered to life, Marcus felt the energy shift. The audience clapped as Victoria introduced him, painting him as a self-made success story who had risen from humble beginnings to build a multi-million-dollar empire. On the surface, her tone was warm and inviting, but Marcus noticed something beneath it, a subtle edge, like she was setting the stage for something more than just a casual conversation. The first few minutes of the interview went smoothly. Victoria asked predictable questions. How did you get started? What inspired your business idea? How do you balance work and personal life? Marcus answered thoughtfully, sharing anecdotes from his journey and sprinkling in moments of humor that made the audience laugh. He spoke passionately about the importance of representation in tech and how his company aimed to break barriers by hiring diverse teams. For a moment, it felt like any other interview, polite, engaging, and inspiring. But then, Victoria shifted gears. With a practiced smile, she leaned forward slightly, her voice adopting a tone that was both curious and probing. Marcus, she began, your rise to success is truly impressive. But some might say that part of your success comes not just from talent or hard work, but also from riding the wave of diversity initiatives sweeping corporate America. What do you think about that? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus blinked once, his expression unreadable. He wasn't naive. He knew this line of questioning could come up. Still, there was something about the way Victoria phrased it that felt calculated, almost condescending. It wasn't just a question. It was an insinuation wrapped in polite language. The audience grew quieter, sensing the tension building between the two. Before Marcus could respond, Victoria continued, her words flowing effortlessly but carrying a sting. I mean, let's be honest. There are programs out there specifically designed to boost minority entrepreneurs. Do you think people might wonder if your success would have been possible without those kinds of opportunities? She tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into what might have been mistaken for a friendly grin if it weren't for the weight of her implication. Marcus took a deep breath, his mind racing. He could feel the eyes of millions watching, not just in the studio, but at home too. This was the moment where many others might have stumbled, letting frustration or defensiveness take over. But Marcus was different. He had faced far worse than thinly veiled accusations in his lifetime. Instead of reacting immediately, he paused, collecting his thoughts. His silence spoke volumes, and for a brief second, even Victoria seemed unsure of what to say next. When Marcus finally responded, his voice was steady and measured. Victoria, he said, leaning forward slightly to match her posture, it's true that there are initiatives aimed at leveling the playing field for underrepresented groups. And I'm grateful for them, because they address systemic inequities that have existed for decades. He paused again, letting his words sink in before adding, but let me ask you this. Why does supporting diversity automatically diminish someone's achievements? Shouldn't we celebrate the fact that doors are finally opening for talented individuals who were previously shut out? His response drew scattered applause from the audience, though Victoria quickly interjected, trying to regain control of the narrative. Of course, no one's saying these programs aren't important, she said, her tone shifting ever so slightly. But don't you think it's fair to acknowledge that some people may perceive them as shortcuts? The word landed like a pebble dropped into still water, rippling through the room. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his sharp gaze locking onto hers. Shortcuts, he echoed softly, his voice laced with disbelief. If working twice as hard to prove yourself while navigating biases and barriers is considered a shortcut, then maybe we need to redefine what success really means. The audience erupted into louder applause this time, clearly siding with Marcus. Victoria forced a tight smile, clearly unprepared for his composure and clarity. What had started as a routine morning show segment was quickly turning into something much bigger, a clash of perspectives that would leave viewers talking long after the credits rolled. The tension in the studio was palpable, like a storm brewing on the horizon. Victoria Langston's attempt to frame Marcus Reed's success as a product of shortcuts had backfired spectacularly, and she seemed determined to dig herself deeper. Her next question came fast, almost too eager, as if she hoped to catch him off guard. Marcus, she said, her tone sharp but masked with feigned curiosity, isn't it possible that your achievements are being amplified simply because you're, well, a minority entrepreneur. I mean, let's face it, there's a lot of attention given to stories like yours these days. Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some exchanging glances while others leaned forward, captivated by the unfolding drama. Marcus didn't flinch. His eyes locked onto hers, unblinking, as though he could see right through her polished exterior to the biases beneath. For a moment, there was silence, a charged pause that stretched just long enough for everyone to feel its weight. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice carried an authority that silenced even the faint murmurs in the crowd. "Victoria," he began, his tone calm but firm, "it's interesting that you bring up amplification, because what I've noticed is that when white entrepreneurs succeed, we call it innovation or brilliance. But when someone who looks like me achieves something similar, suddenly people start questioning whether they truly earned it, or worse, accuse them of riding a trend." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "I built my company from scratch, not because of pity or handouts, but because I saw problems no one else was solving and worked tirelessly to fix them. My team and I spent years facing rejection after rejection, not because our ideas weren't good enough, but because of preconceived notions about who gets to be successful." As he spoke, his voice grew stronger, more impassioned, yet never lost its measured tone. "So yes, there is attention on stories like mine. But maybe that's because society is finally waking up to the fact that talent isn't limited to one race, gender, or background. Maybe it's time we stop seeing diversity as a threat and start recognizing it as a strength." The audience erupted into applause, unable to contain their admiration for Marcus's eloquence and poise. Some stood up, cheering loudly, while others nodded vigorously in agreement. Even the crew behind the cameras exchanged approving looks, clearly moved by his response. Meanwhile, Victoria sat frozen in her chair, her practiced smile faltering for the first time. She hadn't expected this level of pushback, not so articulate, not so incisive. But Marcus wasn't done yet. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing as he delivered the final blow. "You mentioned trends earlier," he said, his tone now tinged with irony. "If celebrating hard work and resilience among underrepresented groups is considered a trend, then I hope it's one that sticks around. Because honestly, it's about time." The room exploded again, this time with whistles and cheers echoing throughout the studio. People clapped so hard that several members of the audience gave standing ovations, their faces glowing with pride and admiration. Social media lit up instantly as viewers watching at home scrambled to share clips of Marcus's fiery rebuttal. Hashtags like #RespectForMarcus and #TruthTold began trending within minutes, flooding platforms with messages of support. Victoria, visibly shaken, tried to steer the conversation back toward safer territory, but it was clear she'd lost control of the narrative. Her attempts to interject fell flat against the wave of enthusiasm for Marcus, whose composed demeanor only underscored the depth of her misstep. As the segment drew to a close, the host wrapped things up hastily, thanking Marcus for joining the show, but her usual charm felt forced, her confidence rattled. Backstage, as Marcus stepped away from the set, he couldn't help but reflect on what had just happened. He hadn't planned to confront Victoria so directly, but sometimes truth demanded to be spoken. Little did he know, his words would resonate far beyond the confines of the studio, sparking conversations across the nation and cementing his place as a voice for change. What started as a routine interview had transformed into something extraordinary, a moment that would define not only Marcus's legacy, but also challenge the way America thought about success, bias, and representation. Within minutes of the interview ending, clips of Marcus Reed's powerful exchange with Victoria Langston began flooding social media. Viewers who had been casually sipping their morning coffee or scrolling through their phones suddenly found themselves glued to their screens, watching and rewatching the moment when Marcus dismantled her pointed questions with clarity and grace. It wasn't just his words that captivated people, it was the calm authority in his voice, the unwavering confidence in his posture, and the undeniable truth behind everything he said. By lunchtime, hashtags like #MarcusReadTruth and #StandWithMarcus were trending on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. People from all walks of life shared snippets of the interview, adding their own commentary about why his responses resonated so deeply. "This is what happens when you underestimate someone," one user tweeted, alongside a clip of Marcus countering Victoria's accusation of shortcuts. Another wrote, "Finally, someone called out the double standards. This is every thing." Influencers and activists joined in, amplifying the conversation and praising Marcus for using the platform to address systemic inequities rather than simply defending himself. Mainstream news outlets quickly picked up the story, devoting entire segments to analyzing the fallout. Talk shows debated whether Victoria's line of questioning was fair or overly aggressive, while opinion pieces dissected the broader implications of how minority entrepreneurs are often scrutinized differently than their white counterparts. Some commentators argued that Victoria's approach reflected deeper societal biases, while others defended her right to ask tough questions, even if they came across as insensitive. What made Marcus's response particularly impactful was its universality. While his experience as a Black entrepreneur was unique, many viewers saw parallels in their own lives. Women talked about being dismissed in male-dominated industries. Immigrants recounted stories of having to prove themselves twice as hard to earn recognition. Young professionals described facing skepticism because of their age. Marcus's words became a rallying cry for anyone who had ever felt underestimated or judged unfairly. The viral nature of the interview also brought renewed attention to Marcus's company and mission. Curious viewers flocked to his website, eager to learn more about the software solutions he offered and the values his business stood for. Within hours, sales inquiries skyrocketed, and job applications poured in from talented individuals inspired by his leadership. His team scrambled to keep up with the sudden influx of interest, but Marcus remained focused, not on the numbers, but on the message he wanted to send. As the day wore on, something remarkable happened. Strangers started sharing their own stories online. A young Latina entrepreneur posted a video thanking Marcus for giving her hope after years of feeling invisible in boardrooms dominated by men. A middle-aged Asian man wrote a heartfelt post about how Marcus reminded him of his own struggles to break into tech decades ago. Even some white allies chimed in, acknowledging the privilege they'd never had to question and pledging to support diversity initiatives in their workplaces. Meanwhile, Victoria Langston's name trended too, but not in the way she might have hoped. Critics skewered her handling of the interview, calling her tone patronizing and her questions loaded with bias. Clips of her past interviews resurfaced, showing similar patterns where she appeared dismissive or combative toward guests from marginalized communities. Calls for accountability grew louder, with petitions circulating online demanding an apology, or even her removal from the show. Despite the mounting pressure, Marcus chose not to engage further with the controversy. Instead, he focused on channeling the momentum into positive action. That evening, he posted a short video on his social media accounts, thanking everyone for their support. "Today wasn't about me," he said sincerely. "It was about shining a light on the barriers so many of us face, and reminding each other that we're stronger together. Let's use this moment to push for real change." His humility only added fuel to the fire. Supporters rallied around him, organizing virtual events and discussions aimed at addressing inequality in entrepreneurship. Businesses pledged to review their hiring practices, schools announced scholarships for underrepresented students, and community leaders vowed to create mentorship programs modeled after Marcus's own efforts. By the end of the day, it was clear that Marcus Reed's appearance on Morning Talk Live had transcended the boundaries of a typical TV segment. What began as a routine interview had ignited a national dialogue, inspiring countless people to reflect on their aims. The fallout from the explosive interview continued to dominate headlines, but no one felt its impact more acutely than Victoria Langston. For years, she had built her career on being bold, unapologetic, and unafraid to ask tough questions. But this time, It seemed she had pushed too far. The backlash was swift and unrelenting. Sponsors who had once lined up to partner with Morning Talk Live began pulling their ads, citing concerns over public perception. One major coffee brand released a statement saying they could not align themselves with content that perpetuated harmful stereotypes. Within days, several other companies followed suit. Victoria's attempts at damage control only made things worse. During her next broadcast, she addressed the controversy head-on, claiming she had simply been doing her job by asking hard-hitting questions. She insisted that her intentions were never malicious and accused critics of misinterpreting her tone. "I'm here to challenge everyone equally," she declared, her voice tinged with defensiveness. "If we can't have honest conversations about success and privilege, then what are we even doing?" But her explanation rang hollow to many viewers. Clips of her past interviews resurfaced online, showing patterns of dismissive or condescending behavior toward minority guests. A viral thread on Twitter highlighted how she praised white entrepreneurs without questioning their credentials while subjecting people of color to intense scrutiny. Even some of her former colleagues weighed in anonymously, describing her as someone who thrived on creating drama rather than fostering meaningful dialogue. Her credibility crumbled under the weight of these revelations. As Victoria scrambled to salvage her reputation, Marcus Reed stayed silent. He declined multiple requests for follow-up interviews, choosing instead to let the conversation unfold organically. Behind the scenes, his team fielded calls from every major network, all eager to book him for exclusive sit-downs. Yet Marcus remained focused on the bigger picture. He knew the real issue wasn't Victoria. It was the systemic biases she had inadvertently exposed. This wasn't just about one TV host. It was about the broader culture of doubt and discrimination faced by marginalized communities. Despite the mounting pressure, Victoria eventually issued a public apology during her show. Reading from a prepared statement, she acknowledged that her line of questioning may have come across as unfair and promised to do better moving forward. "To Marcus Reed and anyone else who felt hurt by my words, I am truly sorry," she said, her usual confidence replaced by visible unease. "My goal has always been to spark important discussions, but I recognize now that I missed the mark." While some praised her for owning up to her mistakes, others dismissed the apology as insincere, a desperate attempt to save face amid plummeting ratings. Critics pointed out that her statement lacked specifics and failed to address the deeper issues at play. "An apology isn't enough if you don't understand why you're apologizing," one commentator wrote. Victoria needs to confront her own biases before she can expect forgiveness. Amid the chaos, Marcus received an unexpected invitation. Victoria herself reached out, requesting a second interview, this time live and unscripted, to discuss what had happened. Her producers framed it as an opportunity for healing and accountability, urging Marcus to accept. At first, he hesitated. Did he really want to give her another platform? Would revisiting the incident only prolong the drama? Ultimately, Marcus agreed, but on his terms. He made it clear that the conversation wouldn't focus solely on their personal exchange. Instead, he wanted to use the platform to talk about the larger struggles facing minority entrepreneurs and professionals. "This isn't about me versus Victoria," he told his team. "It's about shining a light on the barriers so many people face daily. If we can turn this moment into something productive, then maybe there's value in going back." The announcement sent shockwaves through the media world. Viewers speculated endlessly about what might happen during the rematch. Would Marcus hold Victoria accountable? Would she genuinely listen, or would she double down on her previous stance? Whatever the outcome, one thing was certain: the nation would be watching. And for Marcus, that meant an unparalleled chance to drive home the message he'd been fighting for all along: the importance of equity, representation, and respect in every corner of society. The announcement of the rematch between Marcus Reed and Victoria Langston sent ripples across the country. People couldn't stop talking about it. What would Marcus say? How would Victoria respond? The anticipation was electric, with social media buzzing like a hive of activity. Viewers debated endlessly, some rooting for Marcus to deliver another knockout response, while others hoped Victoria might redeem herself. For many, this wasn't just another TV moment. It felt like a reckoning. As the date of the interview approached, grassroots movements began to take shape online. Hashtags like hashtag no more microaggressions and hashtag equity in action gained traction, sparking conversations about the everyday challenges faced by marginalized communities. Minority entrepreneurs shared their own stories of bias in boardrooms, loan denials from banks, and dismissive attitudes from investors. One woman posted a video recounting how she'd been told her business idea was cute but not scalable, only to see a white male counterpart receive millions in funding for the same concept. Another man wrote about being mistaken for an intern at his own company meeting despite being the CEO. These personal accounts resonated deeply, creating a sense of solidarity among those who had long felt invisible. Inspired by Marcus's courage, people started organizing virtual panels, workshops, and mentorship programs aimed at supporting underrepresented talent. Schools announced initiatives to teach students about systemic inequities, and local businesses pledged to review their hiring practices. What began as a single confrontation on live television was now evolving into a nationwide movement, one that demanded accountability and action. For Marcus, the growing momentum reinforced why he had agreed to return to the show. He knew this wasn't just about him or Victoria. It was about using his platform to amplify voices that often went unheard. In preparation for the interview, he spent hours consulting with colleagues, activists, and community leaders, crafting a message that would resonate beyond the studio audience. He wanted to ensure that the conversation wouldn't devolve into finger-pointing or sensationalism, but would instead focus on solutions, concrete steps society could take to dismantle barriers and create opportunities for everyone. Meanwhile, Victoria seemed determined to prove she had changed. Leading up to the interview, she made appearances on other shows, speaking candidly, or at least attempting to, about her missteps. She admitted to feeling blindsided by the backlash, but insisted she was committed to learning from the experience. Some skeptics dismissed her efforts as performative, while others cautiously praised her willingness to engage in self-reflection. Either way, the stakes couldn't have been higher for both of them. On the morning of the much-anticipated rematch, the energy in the studio was unlike anything anyone had seen before. The audience was packed with a diverse mix of supporters, critics, and curious onlookers, all eager to witness history unfold. Cameras rolled as Victoria introduced Marcus, her tone noticeably softer than during their first encounter. "Marcus, thank you for coming back," she said, her voice tinged with sincerity. "I know our last conversation sparked a lot of important discussions, and I want to use today's platform to continue that dialogue." Marcus nodded politely, his expression calm but resolute. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't waste time rehashing old grievances. Instead, he dove straight into the heart of the matter: the systemic inequities that plague industries ranging from tech to entertainment. He spoke passionately about the need for inclusive policies, fair access to capital, and representation in leadership roles. "It's not enough to say we support diversity," he emphasized. "We have to actively invest in it, in our schools, workplaces, and communities." Victoria listened intently, nodding along as Marcus outlined actionable steps companies could take to foster equity. For once, she didn't interrupt or try to steer the conversation back to herself. When it was her turn to respond, she acknowledged the validity of his points, even admitting that she had underestimated the impact of her words in the past. "You've opened my eyes to things I hadn't fully understood," she admitted, her voice steady, but tinged with humility. "And for that, I'm grateful." By the end of the segment, the atmosphere in the studio had shifted. There was no standing ovation this time, no eruption of applause. But there was something quieter, more profound: a sense of hope. As Marcus left the set, he knew the work was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like real progress was within reach. The rematch between Marcus Reed and Victoria Langston unfolded with a tension that was almost palpable. But this time, the tone was markedly different. Gone was the sharp edge of accusation and defensiveness. Instead, the conversation carried the weight of reflection and responsibility. From the moment the cameras rolled, it was clear that both parties had come prepared, not to win an argument, but to address something much larger than themselves. Victoria opened the interview by acknowledging her missteps from their first encounter. "Marcus, I owe you, and your audience, an apology," she began, her voice steady, but tinged with vulnerability. "My questions came across as dismissive and unfair, and for that, I take full responsibility. It wasn't my intention to undermine your achievements, but intentions don't erase impact." Her words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered, as the studio audience absorbed the gravity of her admission. For a brief moment, there was silence. No applause, no murmurs, just the quiet anticipation of what would come next. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful rather than triumphant. "Thank you for saying that, Victoria," he replied, his tone measured but sincere. "Apologies are important, but they're only the beginning. What matters now is how we move forward, how we use moments like this to create real change." With that, Marcus shifted the focus away from personal accountability and toward systemic issues. He spoke about the countless barriers faced by minority entrepreneurs: biased algorithms in lending systems, lack of access to venture capital, and exclusionary networking circles that often shut out talented individuals simply because they didn't fit a certain mold. His delivery was calm yet impassioned, painting a vivid picture of the uphill battles so many people fought daily just to be seen as equals. Victoria listened intently, occasionally nodding or jotting down notes. At one point, she interjected, asking Marcus what concrete actions companies and media platforms could take to address these inequities. Her question caught him, and the audience, by surprise. It wasn't defensive or dismissive. It was genuine curiosity, a sign that she was finally willing to listen. Marcus seized the opportunity. "First, we need transparency," he explained. "Companies should publicly share data on hiring practices, promotions, and funding allocations. If disparities exist, admit them, and then work to fix them. Second, mentorship matters. Successful leaders need to actively invest in nurturing talent from underrepresented communities. And third, we must rethink how stories are told in media. Representation isn't just about who gets invited to the table. It's about amplifying voices that challenge stereotypes and inspire others." As Marcus outlined these steps, Victoria nodded thoughtfully, her demeanor shifting from contrite to engaged. For the first time in her career, she seemed less concerned with controlling the narrative and more focused on understanding it. When it was her turn to speak again, she admitted that she hadn't fully grasped the extent of systemic bias until recently. "I've always prided myself on asking tough questions," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "But I realize now that I wasn't asking the right ones. I was so focused on creating drama that I lost sight of the real issues." The audience reacted with a mix of surprise and approval. Some clapped softly, while others exchanged nods of agreement. The energy in the room felt different, less combative, more collaborative. Even the production crew backstage whispered among themselves, remarking on how rare it was to see such authenticity on live television. By the end of the segment, Victoria made a bold announcement. She pledged to dedicate a portion of her show each week to highlighting stories of resilience and innovation from marginalized communities. She also promised to undergo diversity training herself and bring in experts to educate her team on unconscious bias. While skeptics might have dismissed these promises as PR moves, her sincerity seemed undeniable, at least for now. As the credits rolled, Marcus stood up and extended his hand to Victoria. She hesitated for a split second before shaking it firmly, a gesture that symbolized not closure, but a new beginning. Outside the studio, social media erupted once again. But this time, the conversation centered around hope and possibility. Viewers praised Marcus for his grace and leadership, while cautiously optimistic comments poured in about Victoria's apparent willingness to grow. For Marcus, the day marked another milestone in his journey, not as a businessman seeking validation, but as a catalyst for change. He knew the road ahead would still be fraught with challenges, but if even someone like Victoria could start questioning her biases, then maybe there was reason to believe that society could evolve too. As he walked out of the ripple effects of Marcus Reed's second appearance on Morning Talk Live were felt far beyond the confines of the studio. In the days and weeks that followed, the conversation he had sparked continued to gain momentum, transcending social media hashtags and news headlines to become a tangible force for change. People weren't just talking anymore, they were taking action. Victoria Langston's pledge to dedicate airtime to underrepresented voices began almost immediately. Her first segment featured a panel of Black, Latina, and Asian female founders who shared their journeys of building businesses against all odds. The episode drew record viewership, with audiences captivated not only by the entrepreneurs' stories, but also by Victoria's visible effort to listen rather than dominate. Critics who had once dismissed her apology as insincere now cautiously praised her willingness to evolve, though many remained watchful, ensuring she followed through on her promises. Meanwhile, Marcus became a household name, a symbol of resilience, grace, and unyielding determination. Invitations poured in from universities, conferences, and corporate boards eager to hear him speak about leadership, equity, and innovation. But Marcus didn't let the attention go to his head. Instead, he used every platform to amplify others. At one tech summit, he invited 3 young entrepreneurs from marginalized communities to join him on stage, giving them the spotlight to pitch their ideas to potential investors. His message was clear. Success isn't just about individual achievement. It's about lifting others as you climb. Inspired by Marcus's example, companies across industries started reevaluating their practices. A major venture capital firm announced it would allocate 30% of its funds to minority-led startups. Another launched a mentorship program pairing seasoned executives with emerging entrepreneurs from underrepresented backgrounds. Even schools joined the movement, introducing curriculums focused on teaching students about systemic inequities and the importance of representation in leadership. But perhaps the most profound impact was seen in the everyday lives of ordinary people. Teachers reported having deeper conversations with their students about bias and fairness. Managers held team meetings to discuss how they could create more inclusive workplaces. Families sat around dinner tables sharing stories of times they'd faced discrimination and brainstorming ways to support each other moving forward. What had begun as a single televised moment had ignited a cultural shift, encouraging individuals to reflect on their own roles in perpetuating or dismantling inequality. For Marcus, this widespread awakening reinforced his belief in the power of storytelling. He often reflected on how his own journey, from fixing old computers in his mother's living room to standing toe-to-toe with a national TV host, had resonated with so many people. It wasn't just his words that inspired others. It was the authenticity behind them. He knew that real change wouldn't happen overnight, but seeing so many people take even small steps toward progress filled him with hope. As months passed, the initial frenzy surrounding the interview gradually subsided, replaced by quieter, steadier efforts to build a fairer society. Marcus returned to focusing on his company, which continued to thrive while staying true to its mission of hiring diverse talent and solving problems for underserved communities. Yet, he never lost sight of the bigger picture. Every decision he made, every speech he gave, carried the same underlying message: we are stronger together. In an unexpected twist, Victoria reached out to Marcus privately months later, thanking him for challenging her to grow. She admitted that hosting those new segments had opened her eyes to perspectives she'd never considered before. While Marcus remained cautious, not wanting to overestimate her transformation, he appreciated her honesty. They parted ways amicably, both recognizing that their paths, though vastly different, were now intertwined in this larger narrative of accountability and growth. Looking back, Marcus couldn't pinpoint a single moment when everything changed. There was no grand declaration or miraculous breakthrough. just countless small actions adding up to something greater. And perhaps that was the beauty of it. Real change doesn't come from dramatic confrontations alone. It comes from planting seeds of understanding and nurturing them until they bloom into something enduring. Marcus Reed's legacy wasn't defined by the day he stood up to Victoria Langston. It was shaped by what came after. By refusing to let bitterness take root and choosing instead to channel his energy into creating opportunities for others, he proved that courage isn't just about speaking truth to power. It's about using that truth to build bridges, break barriers,